All right, welcome to what we're going to call episode 38 of the Athletic Philosopher podcast. We're moving on up in the world of numbers. I am your host, Jordan Goldstein, former professor of sport history, philosophy, sociology, a little bit of everything over at the academy. Wasn't the place for me for a whole host of reasons. Now we are full into coaching, fitness coaching, life coaching, twined together, endurance training coaching as the tribal prof, and having discussions with interesting people like the guest I have today. We've got Ken, or Barefoot Ken, as he is known on socials, a runner extraordinaire who, like the guest I had a few weeks ago, Professor Scott Parker, is interested in the sort of artistic, the spiritual, the subjective side of what running and, more broadly speaking, a physical practice can give us in terms of meaning, purpose, orientation. And when he messaged me mentioning that he was writing or compiling a book of Thoreau quotes, and I had just written an article on my Substack about reading Walden and finding some golden pieces of training advice located in Walden, I thought, okay, this is somebody I need to talk to and have a conversation with. So I will introduce Ken to everybody. And if there's anything I missed in that introduction, please let the beautiful people out there know. And then we will just swirl right into it.
Hey, Jordan, thanks for having me on your podcast, and I think that's great. And I suspect that you and I have a lot in common. We'll see. Maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe it's a categorical difference. Maybe it's a scale difference. A little philosophy, language for those folks out there who care about such things. But one of the things that immediately is interesting to me is I just completed yesterday a goal that I had sort of set out in my mind, that I've been sort of in and around for about maybe 2.5, almost 3 years, and that is running an entire marathon in a fasted state without taking any water or any food or fuel along the way. Now, I initially was training to take this down in the fall of 2023. That's right. Um, and I was in good shape and I was ready to go, but I accidentally stepped on a sewing needle in my house and I had to eventually have surgery on that. So I couldn't do it. Then I pushed it to the spring. Oh, no, this is 2022. I pushed it to the spring of 2023. And the one wrinkle to this was I was doing it solely on a trail with about, over the full marathon, about 2,500 feet of elevation. So it was a really difficult terrain. The first time I did it, didn't go so hot. Got to 19 miles, expired, got it out to about 23 and a half. Second time, I was able to conquer about 20 miles, then I had to walk, but was able to make it back to my car after 25 miles. So this 26.2 is an elusive number that was still kind of out there for me. And in my new situation here in Chicago, I kind of came up with the idea of like a half trail marathon and a half road marathon from my front door put together in one effort, and to see if I could finally take down that 26.2, which I did yesterday. Only needed to walk the final half mile or so, and that put me at a time of, I think it was like 4 hours and 6 minutes for the whole thing. I could have ran the final bit, but I had to literally rally within an hour and go pick my kids up, and I'm the only parent in the house. So I
Right.
wasn't about to just like run through the line for glory and then like die. Perspective is in order. But Ken has mentioned to me that he's had similar experiences or put himself through similar trials. So I'll just simply ask you the question: why run an absurdly long distance without water or fuel, or maybe more broadly speaking, in a running a long distance in a style that deprives you of the energy that you effectively need to keep going? And
Right.
maybe we'll just spin that into a broad conversation about like what running gives to us
Mhm.
in sort of like a spirit, as a spiritual or a mental practice.
Right. Well, Jordan, I was just so surprised to hear about your story because I went through something very similar. And so you asked why. So I'll give you a couple of answers. And one is going back to my 40s. it became evident to me that too much sugar was not good for me. And since then, we've seen metabolic illness has become rampant in the country for a number of reasons. And people worry that metabolic illness, it's not only a function of, or it doesn't only lead to obesity, but it can lead to diabetes. And there's people who think that metabolic illness and inflammation are the root cause for all sorts of bad problems like Alzheimer's or heart disease or cancer. So right or wrong, um, my view is that running in a fasted state is the absolute number one um, key to sustaining metabolic health, and that's more important for most of us than a few seconds on your race time. And by the way, I remember when I first got this idea, I couldn't run more than, call it, 12 or 13 miles before hitting that sugar wall. Not only legs turning to molasses, but that dark feeling of impending, doom and self-destruction. And I pushed it from 12 to 16 to 20. I finally did a marathon. The longest I've done without calories is 50 miles. So, but here's the second reason, that 50-mile run. Part of the reason I decided to do it without food or water was at that point I was injured, and so I knew I was only going to be able to just barely complete the event and not go for a personal best. So what we have in terms of flexibility in our athletic practice is the ability to shift load, right? So if injury or soreness or niggles are a limiting factor, shift the load to your metabolic system. Or you can go, as I do, barefoot and shift the load to the skin on your feet instead of that sore tendon.
Okay. So it's kind of like and I appreciate that you called out the sort of the metabolic issue because that is a big reason why I would suggest 99% of all my exercise in a fasted state is it's not performance based. It is directly aimed at that metabolic dynamism. So that's a great call out. So there is some physiological reason why you might want to say just go for your normal jog in a fasted state. But that's interesting that you're talking about like shifting the load. And one of the things that really surprises me about, your ability or my ability to take down these big time distances without energy inputs is the adaptability of the body. And I think that's what you're mentioning here. Do you have any other thoughts on that when it comes to shifting the load or effectively like utilizing different parts of us to, distract or to push through one type of an adversity by relying on sort of our other faculties in certain situations?
Yeah, and by the way, I can't help mentioning on the getting by without food subject. I just watched a documentary, and I hope to say their name right, about the Kung tribe of Southern Africa, and it's from the 50s, and it tracks them on a hunt. They shot a giraffe with a poison tip arrow, and they spent the next 3 days tracking it down. So they didn't have any food for 3 days until they caught the giraffe. Our ancestors, if you go back far enough, they had enough food to survive and reproduce, or we wouldn't be here. But I don't think they ate every day necessarily. And so the question is, if that's how we evolved, that's going to be the most natural state for us. And health, I think, is going to be highly correlated to being in a natural state and having the stresses that the body expects. You lose those stresses, the body loses the capacity to manage itself. I think, there's a lot of aspects to spirituality, but with respect to an athletic practice, I think the first and most obvious element is to put ourselves through, stressful environments in order to just get better at managing ourselves under stress. And hopefully you do that run without food and water. It's tough, but then you go to work and you have some problem there, or you have to deal with, other challenges that life throws at you. And you're like, this is difficult, but I can manage myself through a difficult environment. I have that practice. I have that confidence. To me, that's
Mm.
the first element of the so-called spiritual practice that maybe you and I and others are seeking beyond just the recreational aspect of sports.
We're looking for a type of truth and wisdom that can be applied, and that is broad, and that's broad enough that when applied, right, makes a difference. Yeah, absolutely, and I like that. I like that broadly when thinking about the spiritual element of sports, because ultimately, when I think about the spirit, what is it? I like to talk about it in terms of willpower. It's one of those, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna like measure the spirit, you're gonna like observe it, you're gonna locate it physiologically, not gonna happen, right? But willpower is something we all understand because we can see it in action, we can embody it, we can be determined, we can push through adversity, and feeling that viscerally inside the body. At its base level, it just teaches us that this thing is true and is a part of us and is real and can be summoned at certain times when necessary. But there's something you said which is intriguing to me, which is this idea of natural state, right? Natural state, right? And when you're talking about the persistence hunt, or the long evolution of humanity, yeah, it's certain that we were not eating all day every day. You'd be lucky to
Or at
graze in
least in
between.
gels and tailwind.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there was something I saw, it was a couple weeks ago, I think. It was something about, ultra runners, and triathletes, and the people who rely on these like highly concentrated sugar concoctions. All we're doing is messing our gut up.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
destroying our microbiomes, and it's like it's good for performance, but it's not necessarily great for health and
Yeah.
longevity, or even like properly functioning body over time.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to make the mistake of saying because I'm a runner or an athlete, it does not matter what I eat. That's not the right
Correct.
attitude. You want to fuel yourself. And look, if you're trying to set a personal best in a race, for sure, some amount of sugar is going to be helpful. But you wouldn't want to eat like that on a daily basis. By the way, I've got I know you're going to appreciate this, so I've got a favorite Thoreau quote, which I
Please.
think gets at this heart of the natural state in the spiritual
Yeah.
element to athleticism. Thoreau wrote that we need the tonic of wildness.
Mm,
And what does that mean? He elaborates. He said, we need to witness our own limits transgressed.
yeah.
So in other words, part of what we're trying to do with our practice is get ourselves out of our comfort box and undergo some of that stress and discomfort that teaches you, hey, you've got traction. You are starting to push the envelope. You're engaged.
Yeah, I like this. And, Thoreau is part of the school of philosophy known as Transcendentalism. For people out there, the Transcendentalists effectively want us to escape into nature as a way to locate that sort of inner signal right there
Yes.
that
Well,
Ken
I
was
love how
talking
you
about.
say the inner signal. I had an experience um, a few years back, and uh, it's interesting. I heard the mountains call.
Hmm.
I was 50 years old, and the funny thing is, like, Ken, where were you for the first 50 years? And they were calling, but I was just, I couldn't, I
Not
didn't
even to listen.
receive the signal. The signal was
There,
drowned out by the
there you
noise.
go.
And the funny thing is, when I stared at these mountains, and this is the Catskill Mountains in New York, I had the strong impression that there was a radio signal emanating from the mountain peaks, which was in unlocking some kind of secret, mechanism in me. And I think that is nature brings forth those human strengths that are prepackaged. And the question is, how do you get those strengths unlocked?
Okay, so I really appreciate that. Wild out there theory that I have, I believe that the human heart is actually a transmitter. It's some sort of a frequency machine. and it is out, it's inside of us to receive these types of messages, right? There's that, whatever you want to call that. I don't really care. Like, eventually science will prove that to be true. I think the sun is definitely one of these giant transmitters
Mhm.
that kind of gets directly into this transmitter, but certainly nature, other people's hearts,
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
I really think that when you're opening the heart up, what you're doing is you are allowing different frequencies to come in, and then you can either run away because they're terrifying, or you become emboldened to sort of like act and move through them. But that's sort of it's a big tangent in terms of some of the things that I think about. And certainly thought about that a decent amount yesterday on this 4 hour run without water or food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
It,
but what you say there is really interesting about, like, again, what's this natural way that we can tap into it? And you and I were both talking here about running, and let's just be frank, right? The human body is made to run. Like, it is made to run. Running is a natural motion for the human body, right? And there's lots of intriguing evidence. I wonder if this is a book title that you've heard or not, but you may appreciate it if you haven't. It's called Racing the Antelope.
by what's his name?
Heinrich.
Heinrich. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I haven't looked at that in a little while. He changed the title, right? The Racing the
He
Antelope
did.
was
Yeah,
first.
yeah. It was.
He changed it to Why We Run, I think. Is that what it's called?
Yes, he
Yeah.
changed. He did change it to Why We Run, but I used to teach one or two of the
Right.
chapters in my intro to the history and philosophy of sport class that I used to teach my first years as a prof. So yeah, I think the old one's like Racing the Antelope. The new one is Why We Run.
Right.
Either way,
Yeah.
really cool book for people who are interested in these types of things. Go check it out. But he lays out this incredible physiological evolutionary argument that the human body evolved and adapted specifically to run. If you think about, like, we don't have hair because we need to sweat, that's also not panting, so that I can run in a nice low zone too. I can release the heat from my body and I can keep going, right? And I can keep going. As just one example. Another really cool example is that the structure of my foot is made to walk, but it's also made to run, which means Barefoot Ken makes a lot of sense, right? Like, you don't need a shoe. Your foot is perfectly engineered to run. We just cram them into shoes. We don't run on them. And then, like, we have these hobbled feet. Shout out to Barefoot Will, Austin Keith, who's big on
Uh-huh.
Twitter for this, showing us these things that you know, my body is meant to do these things. Like, my body is meant to be able to run for a long period of time without a lot of energy inputs, right? In order for us to
You know,
survive, just
right,
like that South African tribe that you were
exactly,
mentioning.
exactly. And they keep coming back to me. And by the way, Dan Lieberman has, I think, now the poster child for the theory of persistence hunting. Um, by the way, these guys, the Kung tribe, when they finally cornered the giraffe, they threw their spears at it, right? And the spears went in 3 or 4 inches, which to you or I would be like a toothpick. So, and then once they threw their spears, what were they going to do next? Well, they had to find pieces of wood, right? And then throw them to dislodge the spears. So what they did is they spent hours and they ended up exasperating the giraffe to death,
Yeah.
right? They really just tired it out because they had surrounded it, but the spears weren't actually killing it. And that's how hard our ancestors had to work. And that's emblematic of the strength that's just in us. Hey, by the way, from uh, Heinrich's book, I loved how he talked about running is our connection to our ancestors and to our animal friends and relatives. And that means a lot to me. I can't tell you how many. It's so weird, Jordan. But I was out, for example, on the John Muir Trail. I did that barefoot, and I just kept thinking about the Native American tribes out there and how they used to go around barefoot in the summer. And I thought to myself, they were, compared to me, they would have been so agile and their feet would have been so strong. But at some point, if they needed to cover ground for some reason, their feet would have been tired just like mine.
Yep.
And so it is that real connection. And I think, you get out and you spend time in the wilderness and you start to rediscover this affinity towards other living things, this sense of connection. I'm just, I have all these fancy attributes in the modern world, but out there, I'm just another animal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
my
It's like,
peers. They may be bigger or smaller, but we're all out there trying to survive in the forest.
yeah, you get stripped down to the essence, right?
Right.
Like when we're trying to talk about like separating the signal from the noise, I mean, getting rid of all the distractions allows me to hear the simplicity of the signal, which I think I think all the religions in the world try to teach us and tell us to do things, and we kind of allow the formal structures of religion to get in the way. But if you just look at the actual stories, like if I'm Jewish, so if you look at
Mhm.
the story of Moses, for example, like where does Moses find God? Does he find him in the synagogue? No, he finds him
In the
in
mountain, yeah,
the burning bush in
yeah.
the mountain, right? Like in the desert, right? There's
Oh,
always this like
yeah,
out to the wilderness, out into nature in order to lay bare the truths of existence or consciousness or whatever, so that the truth can be revealed and then understood.
yeah.
um
Now we gotta be careful. I think we need organized religions
Me
to
too,
keep
me too.
people from complete chaos and being each other
Yeah,
at each
yeah, no,
other's
no, no,
throats.
it's not against
But
that. It's more like
but
it's
there's a
more
lot
the
of
sense of
gaslighting. There's a lot of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
gaslighting and I was just rereading Exodus,
One of my
right?
That's my favorite book, I think.
And Moses came down from the mount, and what were the people doing? They were dancing naked around a golden calf.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
that was like that's got to be the original TikTok moment.
Something like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
for
he
sure.
was he was angry. He was really angry. So we all remember he smashed the tablets.
Yes.
But I don't know if you remember this part. He took the golden calf, ground it up, burned it, ground it up, mixed it with water, and made them drink that.
Yeah.
But that wasn't it. Then he unleashed the sons of Levi. He said, "Teach these people a lesson with your swords."
Yes.
So
Yes, yes,
the
yes.
priestly class is very much an enforcement mechanism.
For
But I
sure.
guess the reality is once you go beyond the 50 or so people that hunter gatherer tribes tended to operate in, you start to need this kind of enforcement mechanism. But part of the I think spiritual journey is exactly what you're saying. The pressure on all of us
Yep.
from so many people and the priestly class, whether it's actual priests or rabbis or whether it's the media or you know, telling you, or it's your friends and family telling you what to do, that becomes super overpowering.
Yes.
And so the wilderness is a chance to shut down not only those voices, but the ego gets so defensive
Yep.
and let that settle down too and just sort of reestablish that more
Hmm.
primitive mindset where you're not in a constant fight with a thousand other people telling you what to do.
Yeah, and the thing and there's lots of ways you can escape into nature, but we're just going to talk about running in
Yeah.
nature. And what you said about like connecting me to my animal friends or to the animal friends, like I believe humans are the least physically impressive of all of the animals. We are the softest, the doughiest, the weakest, the slowest. Like we're there's not one part of us that is physically impressive except long distance
Yeah.
running. It's the one and the fact that we have these gigantic brains and then but is and then we can start to parse words and is thinking physical or not, is tool making physical or not. I'm like not interested in that. It's clear that if you just stack us pound for pound against all the other animals, we're pretty much going to get eaten or killed by every single one of them because we're just not physically impressive. But we can run, and we can run for basically ever. And so when I'm in nature, blocked out from the distractions, ensconced in what? A different type of a home where I feel at rest and I feel at peace, and I am embodying out the actions that make me a human, maybe divinely set me apart from some of the other animals. I'm really able to know things. Like deeply. Like I'm really able to know things when I have this combination, like nature, the right type of exertion, and then I would also suggest like the right attitude and framework, or one of the words that I've sort of coined up in the last couple months is heart stance. Like if I'm
Mhm.
my heart is open to the experience, if I'm being pushed forward by love and passion, as opposed to like being closed off and doing it for the wrong reason. So I wonder if you could speak on intention or motivation in order to really bring about these
Yeah.
sorts of states and revelations that you and I go out into the woods to
Yeah.
find, but others may be skeptical about.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. And it starts again with the information overload of the modern world, which we all know, but it makes people very defensive and angry. And that's been known for hundreds of years, if not much longer, if not thousands. But I think you're onto something, Jordan. And I have a favorite saying about the California Indians. And I'm going to quote from an anthropologist named James Miller, who is actually of Lenape descent. He was writing about the California Indians, and he said they believed that their shamans could see into the second night, the night that surrounds the darkness that we perceive, and that the spirit world would send animals as messengers and to help them with their spells. And so, your listeners are probably going, well, wait a second. Let's translate this into science so I can understand
Not my
this.
listeners, no chance.
But
They know that's not the place. They know they're not listening to this for science.
we could talk about Jung, right? Jungian archetypes
Yep.
and other kinds of mental processes that are not the same as conscious calculations, right? So I think out in the wilderness, when you shut down the noise from the voices, and you rediscover that more connected state, you may learn about different parts and pieces, and you may start to have visions or voices that carry different information or different messages from, hey, I've got to get up and get to work and do the following 12 tasks and etc. So as I get a little bit older, but I think many of these visions and voices are very faint. So they're drowned out in the day to day, and you need to quiet things down so that you can hear them.
Yeah. I also think you need space. You need runway. Like it's not like, let's just put it into a running analogy. Let's say I go out to the trail and I decide I'm going to run a half marathon, which is what I do
Mhm.
pretty much every weekend because I
Uh-huh.
love trail half marathons. My favorite training session. Just love them. Just long enough, not too long. Perfect.
Right.
Um am I like transcending? Am I floating for all 13.1 miles of these? Is it like I hit start on my watch and then all of a sudden I'm sort of plugged right into this, whatever, like
Sometimes.
sometimes, but is it really like 100%? Like, I'm not sure about that. It's more like I'm open to the transmission and I'm waiting to receive the signal. And sometimes I get it, honestly. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's like overwhelming. Like I've literally been on runs where I've been flooded with this sort of like information where I'm almost like a conduit, and I almost have to consciously say stop, it's too much. Like stop, and then the next time I go back out I'm like, well, turn it back on. Like I do want some of it, and then it maybe takes me a couple weeks or another
Yeah.
month. So it's not this expectation that I just put a few things in order and then automatically things just come to me. It's much more of this cultivation of space, practice, and repetition, right? And I think we sort of hit on this idea of like organized religion, like, and I'm with you. I think we need it, and it's part because it orders ritual into the practice, and it orders ritual into our existence, where I just have to continue to embody and do the things over and over when I feel like it, when I don't feel like it, when it's totally meaningful, when it seems like I'm just going through the motions, so that I can be open as often as possible to receive different types of frequencies that I'm not always able to perceive. So I think that's another important part of this. It's we cannot force outcome. We cannot force expectation. We cannot force in this feeling or this type of knowledge or information that's maybe esoteric, or shoot, maybe it's even like this sort of Gnostic idea. Gnostic is, for the people who don't know what Gnostic is, that's like knowledge that's sort of beyond the comprehension of being proved or known, but is sort of like
Right.
intuited
It's
or
beyond
felt.
conscious
It's like,
calculation. Yeah.
yeah, and it's a loaded term for sure, and some people hate it, some people love it.
Right.
I think we all have access to it, so it's
There's
intriguing.
a long tradition of people seeking these kinds of insights. And, you could say it's as simple as letting your brain have some time and space and runway and
There you
quiet
go.
to figure out what needs to be figured out. Think about in the Shoshone tribe, there's a tradition, and other Indian tribes, of dream questing.
Yep.
And Chinggis Khan went out to the mountains to seek guidance from, I think it's Tingir, the god of the sky, of the blue
Yep.
sky.
Yeah.
So there's a long tradition for this, and the question is, how much do you need? And I think it also has to do with energy. So
Yes.
here was this strange experience I had, and about 10 years ago, I was in my mid 50s, and I hit this point where work was hitting some speed bumps, and the opportunities were sort of plateauing a little bit. And like most people, I get some of my energy from work,
Hmm.
and some from family, and some from friends, and some from running. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I started to develop some injuries. So
Mm.
I was going through that part of the cycle, and so I had a reduction in energy in my main two sources of energy, which left me feeling. And here's another, Thoreauism. He warned us. He said the majority of men, and I think he meant women too, live lives of quiet desperation. And
Yeah.
a life
Yeah.
of quiet desperation is a low energy state, and it's depending on your personality. You're like, no, no, that I'm not going to settle for that.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that's when I discovered a project out in the mountains, which is more like a peak bagging project, and it's more hiking, and you have the flexibility to go slowly and do it over time,
Cool.
as opposed to being the race, which is high intensity right now.
Yep.
And that project sort of took over my life because it became my source of energy. And the strange thing is, having run and hiked as much as I had at that point, you would have thought I would have had enough nature, but no, actually, I needed it at that point in my life a lot more, as if I had been going through the desert, and I realized all of a sudden that I was thirsty, or I had done your 4-hour marathon, and it's like, now I need some water.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
yeah.
so getting a lot of nature at that point in my life was incredibly important. So there's this interesting question: how much nature do you need? And sometimes it might be very little, but sometimes it might be a lot.
Yeah, sometimes it might just be going out in your backyard in the morning and putting your feet on the grass for a minute before you zoom off for the rest of the day. And that might be your only access to
And
nature.
stepping on a bee, and you're like, I've had enough of this nature.
Pretty much. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nature's great, but nature is also like where all the most horrible things you can imagine
Yeah, right.
happen. And Mother Nature just wants us out of the way. Like, nature doesn't care. Nature just selects, right? There's no meaning or moral
That's
in
one of
nature.
the great blessings of nature, because in the
Yes.
modern world, with people, social and digital, we're in a constant battle. And people are a mix. We mean well, and we're sneaky too. So everybody is trying to model you and figure out what the right thing to say to achieve their goal and make you want to
Yep.
achieve their goal. And nature does that too, but at a geological or evolutionary pace. So the raspberries are like, "Hey, eat us," and poop
Yeah,
out our seeds. But it's
the
not.
stakes are a little more dramatic in nature.
Yeah. So nature, the cognitive load from trying to outguess other people drops. And then
Yeah.
again, that's back to your point about runway and quietness.
So
Um, that's part of
there's
how it recharges you,
this
because it
is
is
so
exhausting,
interesting.
right?
This is so interesting. I'm so glad you brought up that quote from Thoreau, because it's reminding me of the little potential chart, my stamina chart from my Garmin yesterday. Because you have all these stats that come through on your watch, and most of them are not believable at all. But they
Oh
have
my
this.
goodness! Don't get me started on unbelievable stats.
I just find it interesting. The only stat I was interested in yesterday was how many miles I was taking. So
Right.
every mile I was like, I want to know another mile and I want to know my relative pace and because I got to calculate being out here without calories or water and I have to pick my kids up and
Yeah.
that's the things that are going through my mind and you have to think about something for 4 hours. I didn't run with headphones or anything in anyways, but they've got this stat which is like your stamina potential and it's like
Your
you start
body
out at
handling
100%.
and yeah.
Yeah, you start out at 100% and just depending on the run and it showed me yesterday that I hit 1% just after 3 hours and then I had a whole other hour where I was going at apparently I had zero stamina potential. And you're talking about Thoreau in this idea of like quiet desperation. And it's like, yeah, quiet desperation where it's like I'm hurting on the inside, but maybe the hurt's not enough for me to radically change things up. And it's like when we go out into the forest and we take on these big efforts, it's like, no, I demand real desperation. I don't want the quiet. I need the real desperation so that I can be alerted to
Yeah.
something of great meaning or great potential. So there's something I think about seeking out this physical ruin, this gigantic physical challenge that so many of us in the modern world clearly desire when we're talking about, ultra endurance events or it
Yeah.
said you've ran over 110 ultras or something wild like that. Kudos to you.
112. That
Woo!
includes marathons. So that's marathons and ultras.
Marathons and ultras, right? There's something about that need to seek out a desperate place where it's like I'm up against the wall and like I feel like I want to quit, but like if I quit, it's something like death, and I have to keep going forward, and you have to keep going forward. And it's like we need this sort of drama. We need this pivotal moment so that we
Oh,
can know about
absolutely.
ourselves. And that quote,
Absolutely.
it's like
It's
people are like, why are
people.
you doing this? It's like, because I want the loud desperation. I want the
Exactly.
loud desperation of something that I'm in control of so that I'm not like at the mercy of nature where I can, die or be taken out. But it's like, I need to control a space where I can take myself to this desperate breaking point and then the truth about who I really am can be revealed.
Mhm.
And when we're talking about like the transference into the other areas, like that's the nugget that I want. Like I want to know when I'm back up against the wall and the only place forward is like right into more danger. I want to know how I respond. I want to know how I pick myself up. I want to know how I charge forward, right? And when I get that knowledge, when I get that stimulus, when I get that information, like that's the meaning of life or my purpose that is going to allow me to, and I know you mentioned this in one of your other blog posts, that's going to allow me to self-actualize and transcend
Exactly.
myself and like fulfill my destiny or manifest the divine spark inside of me or
Uh,
whatever language you want to use. There's like 1,000 different ways we can try on this coat, but it fits nonetheless.
yeah. I think the word spiritual is an interesting word, and of course, it's typically not defined. But I think we could, add a little bit of a definition to it: agency. That's what you're saying, Jordan. Go back to, Ralph
Yeah.
Waldo Emerson,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
self-reliance, right?
Yep.
And I think
Absolutely.
people get I think that our friends, the priests, are like, no, spirituality is doing what I want you to do. And it's
I
feeling
mean,
guilty. Yeah, spirituality is feeling guilty. No, I tell people, I don't tell people that. This is my summary of spirituality. Make yourself strong, have fun, be nice. It doesn't have to be more complicated. It's now just a question of how you do that. Here's the challenge, right? And Dan Lieberman makes this point in Exercise, which is a really good book. Um, the We're naturally conservative. We're naturally inclined not to spend energy, not to take on risk, because back in the day, surviving, you didn't have anything to waste. But you take that attitude and put it into the modern world where there's an abundance of resources,
mhm.
and you can get stuck. And it's called people call it the comfort trap,
Quiet
right?
desperation. This is
And
the
so you
quiet
got to
desperation
get
right there.
out of that. You've got to light your own fire at this point to take
Yeah.
yourself out of a comfortable zone.
Yep.
Nature's not going to pull you out of the comfort zone if you live in an apartment and work in a cubicle and seek entertainment in a shopping mall. You're protected. You're in sort of like in a cave and you're not exposed, and that's not a good. Yeah. That's not a good place to be. I love what you're saying because, the mark of a free man or a free woman is the ability to take risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you're not taking risk that you want to take, you have become somebody's.
And ultimately to own the consequences of the
Yep.
risk. Like, I'm not free if I take a risk, but I offload all of the negative consequences onto other
That's not much of a
people.
risk then, right? Yeah.
There's no risk. So, and I've said this many times on this podcast, and I say this all the time in my coaching calls. It's like freedom and responsibility, that's the same thing. That's two
Yeah.
sides of the same coin. If I demand freedom, all I'm saying is I want to be responsible for my actions in the world. That's what it means. And that's good. And people obviously get that. That's like the juvenile freshman understanding of freedom, which is like hedonism and just no rules and I do what I want. It's like, okay, but what happens when those things go bad? Like, are you going to
Well,
accept those?
then you learn.
And you are, but I mean, that's the freedom part. Freedom isn't this like thing where I get what I want. Freedom is this horrible thing where the consequences of my actions follow me no matter what, whether I want them or I don't want them. And just to go back to the Exodus story, that's why most people would rather live as slaves, right? Moses is always fighting against the Israelites, who's like, they're always like, we want to go back. What do you mean you want to go back? Well, because you're just leading us out to die in the wilderness, man. And if we go back to Egypt, we're going to get our three squares, we're going to get our shelter, we're going to know our children are secure.
Well, there are
Like we're going to go back. We're going to
trade-offs.
go back to the quiet
Yeah.
desperation.
And there are trade-offs too.
Always.
If you're free to be like our ancestors and go out and hunt and, as opposed to going to the supermarket, that can be awesome unless there's no game.
Yeah,
And you're
exactly.
like, so you do need opportunity to make freedom have value.
Oh,
Otherwise,
for
it's
sure.
logical to say, I'm going to make a decision and sell myself into some kind of contract because I know
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Yeah,
survive
yeah.
otherwise. That's a free decision if that's left up to
If
you.
that's ultimately your
Yeah.
decision. And that's a totally different philosophical argument for another day. But it's very cool. It's very cool we can swirl around all of these intriguing ideas when it comes to the value of something like running, running a long distance and doing it in a compromised state. I'm a big believer in compromise training overall as like a general philosophy. Training in suboptimal states,
Yeah. Well,
both as a way to prepare for races, but most importantly, as the primary vehicle to gain this sort of spiritual knowledge and transference.
well, it's I was thinking about who was the great swimmer Phelps, right? I think he used to his coach would torture him a little bit and say, okay, now I'm going to take off your goggles and you got to swim a lap. And I
Yeah.
was thinking about that because I was in the pool and of course my goggles started leaking. And I was thinking if I do this open water swim I've been thinking about doing, how am I going to clear my goggles out in the middle of some
Ah,
lake with snapping
yeah.
turtles
That's
coming after me? But I think there are a lot of ways. And so you and I are both talking about this minimalist impulse.
yes,
And you and I had corresponded a little bit about the practice. The Greeks called it ascesis.
yes,
And it was going barefoot. It was going without food and water and doing, undertaking feats of endurance. And um, I've studied a little bit about the Yorick Indians in Northwest California, and
sure.
their training called Hoch Kep also involves, fasting, going without food, going without sleep, going out in the trails at night, ideally in stormy weather in search of spiritual powers, right? So I think you have a choice of modalities and you don't have to
Mm.
do everything. Look at Wim Hof is, sitting in tubs of ice. But by the way, if you're thoughtful about this, back to that sore tendon. And by the way, I could take you through I think at this point I've, not to jinx myself, I think I've had every possible running injury at this point. So sometimes running is not going to be the right thing for you, but cold exposure,
Mm.
heat exposure. So I've run in back in the day, I used to run in Death Valley. Or here's something that I do in the Catskill Mountains on occasion, natural navigation. So finding your way through the forest without using map, compass, or GPS. So there's a lot of different ways to put yourself out there and work on a certain level of stress. A lot of the stress that I observe in races that causes people to fail or to quit when maybe they didn't have to is, cognitive load, getting overwhelmed mentally. So put yourself in a position where you have, elevated cognitive load and you've got to manage yourself and solve problems. I'm a race director for one race in New York. It's called the SRT Run, the Schwangau Ridge Trail Run. And
Mm.
it's on trails. This is not the Barclays Marathon, but we don't mark the trails.
Okay.
And we actually give people an app on their phone, a free app, and it's got the map. It's just like Google Maps. So there's no question where you are. But when you're running
Oh yeah.
and you're tired
Yep.
and you're out of breath and
Yep.
you're like, and I've made this mistake, I'm like, well, that looks like a blaze. Actually, it's a spot of lichen.
Oh,
So
always.
it adds a layer of cognitive load, and it's not necessarily the fastest person who wins this race. You have to manage yourself. You have to
Yeah.
be thoughtful about what you're doing. It's not just, otherwise, running can devolve into sort of like a one-dimensional activity. It's all cardio slash muscular endurance.
Yeah.
And that's fine because that's great fun, sort of, right? But there are many other aspects to moving through the forest, which can be training or racing or just fun.
Yeah. Taking something that's like solid state, one dimensional, and turning it into more of a multi-dimensional adventure, which is like something that Thoreau would tell you to go on, which is like go on an adventure. And that's like,
Yeah.
that's the hero's journey. And that's literally what we're all pre-programmed to do. If we're trying to talk about what's our nature, well, yeah, we're physiologically born to run, but we're also like narratively meant to be heroes, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I also think the narrative might be the greatest. I go back and forth between what's the greatest human invention, and I think the narrative might be number one because it's the only way we can understand things is through a story, is through beginning, middle, and
I
an
think
end.
I think you're right. And my day job is in the business world.
Okay.
In the business world, there's a lot of numbers, a lot of people keeping track of a lot of numbers. But if you got to put it into a story because the human brain cannot just process a
The
table
human
with 1,000 numbers.
the human brain automatically puts it like this is where a lot of our mental heuristics come in, is simply just filling in the middle once we recognize the beginning and the end. It's like, oh, now I can automatic. That's how speed reading works. Speed reading teaches you to read like basically the first two and the final two words of a sentence, and then allowing your brain to automatically fill in the gaps, and then to do it for like pages and pages and pages,
Right.
right? Like so there's this interesting way to do it. But I mean, before we spin off too much, I'm going to try and back us up and land the plane here. And not that we ever need to come to some sort of conclusion. That would be in itself a fallacy of what a discussion must be. Is that we're not interested in conclusion. What we're interested in is understanding, information, conversation, a little bit of extrapolation, and ultimately some contemplation. And you know, I just think I think it's worthwhile to have conversations with people who share similar ideas about training that are unorthodox. These are not, you're not going to find like hey, download my 15-day guide on how to run a marathon without water or food. Like,
Well,
the,
but Jordan, I think you're onto something because one of the things that I find a little concerning is, we have those priestly voices, but they're not just priests; they're also, marketers. And so
truth.
I was talking to a young person who might have been my son, but we won't go there. I don't want to put him on the spot. And
Maybe or maybe not.
I said, "You don't look well. What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, I did my normal workout, but my watch says my body battery is really low, and now I'm worried." And I delivered one of these dad lectures, which people probably don't appreciate, but don't use a metric unless you've vetted it, right?
Mm,
Unless you've vetted it, the mechanism and the accuracy. Um, the
mm.
body battery is complete nonsense because first of all, the body does not actually have a battery, right? Just to state the obvious.
It's
But
got a
I
heart.
like to,
It's got
I
a
like to.
heart that beats.
Well, but that's not. It's a heart. It's not.
No, I know, I know.
It's
It's
not
not a
a battery.
battery.
I went to a seminar and organized by a physical therapist who uses some of these measurements, and because I sometimes I go do things to challenge my bias because I can get stuck in a rut like anybody. But yeah, he was pretty clear that the many of those Garmin and other watches have the same features are totally made up. right? There are bells and whistles meant. It is just like this. I was we used to have a Honda, right, and it had one of those driver assist features that would keep you right in the lane, take your
Yep.
hands off the wheel, and it worked fine as long as the road was straight. If the road curved at all, it went flying out of the lane. It was terrible. It was a
Yep.
junk feature. But obviously, and I'm sure they fixed it, and otherwise the car was good. So I don't mean to be critical of Honda, but the manufacturers are competing with each other, and if one has a bell and whistle, the others all have to have bells and whistles.
Right.
And so a lot of life is noise.
Yep.
And if you're going to follow an athletic pursuit, you do want some metrics.
Yes, you
That
need
you're
it.
actually measuring something,
You have
some
to.
level of
Measurement's
performance.
part of it. It's
But
part
you
of it.
got to be careful about
What
David
they are.
Walsh saying you too need to take 600 calories per hour, or the watch manufacturer saying you got to track HRV. That's another one that I tried tracking that, found no signal that I could
Yep.
find. So I
Yep.
do think if you go out to your coaching students and other folks and say, hey, look, instead of chasing the crowd to your best ever 5K that nobody, including yourself, is ever going to care about, think about your training from this different dimension.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think you're going to provide a service to your clients and to others
Yeah, I
by
appreciate.
talking with them about would you run a marathon with no food, with no
Yeah,
calories?
yeah, yeah. I appreciate that. And maybe, thinking about some takeaways for our listeners here, you don't have to go do something that is so dramatic, right? And clearly, like for Ken and I, these are things that we don't just like decide to do on a day. These are things that are like progressively built towards and
Yeah,
trained towards and worked towards, right? Um, but maybe just like this idea of what's your nature? What do you need to block out the distractions around you so that you can get in touch with that inner signal and then find the strength and the courage to then sort of live by what you hear, which generally is the truth. And the truth is generally the scariest thing that there is. So, in order for us to like find courage, bravery, and fortitude in looking at the truth, we got to become strong. And the best place and first place to start that is by making my body strong and feeling myself physically overcoming things, which I can really best do in the physical environment. And if I'm looking for big lessons, well then the challenge should maybe be very big. And certainly we can aim for something like that real desperation, not that quiet desperation, which is what a lot of us maybe find in the gym, which is why we're not finding deep meanings because we're not pushing hard enough and we're not trying hard enough. And ultimately, I think that's a result of not caring hard enough. Shout out to the podcast I recorded right before this, which is all about the importance of caring about what you do and how pushing yourself hard in sports to some sort of a physical breaking point can actually reveal this stuff and will reveal it to you, but only if you go hard and push. But I think what Ken and I are trying to say here is find whatever that is for you. Like for us, that was running in nature. We certainly are big fans of running in nature and think it probably would work for you, but it might not. It might not. So just block out the noise, find the signal, stop living a life of quiet desperation, go big. Sound good?
go big or go home, right?
Go big or go home.
And
That's great.
but
Man, this was a
you
lot
were
of fun.
mentioning that right in your Substack article. I was looking for the video to share with you when I ran the Leadville 100-mile race in I think it was 2011 or something, right below Hope Pass, 12,600 feet.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not called Hope Pass because just hoping is going to get you up and over it. It's not what it's about.
Yeah.
Right below it, right when the trail starts to climb, there's a big pink sign and it said, go big or go home. You wanted to get to the turnaround point, you had no choice.
All right. Well, there you go. I think we'll leave it there. So if you guys like what you've heard from Ken, you are at the Long Brown Path.
Yeah, or you can go to my website. My website is www.barefootken.com.
Perfect. I will link that in the show notes for
Thank you,
those who are
Jordan.
interested. And remember, Ken's got a book coming out, a compilation of Thoreau quotes, and literally got my giant Thoreau reader right here. Everybody should listen to my podcast on Walden. Everyone should just read Thoreau. Just literally
Yeah.
just pick up anything you get and read it. If you don't like it, just stop and then go back in 5 months and read it again and just do that forever. You'll be fine.
I
You'll be fine.
second that. notion. My book is called Chasing the Grid, and it's got a lot of Thoreau in it, and Emerson and Whitman, and it covers that point in my life I was talking about when I needed more nature. It was a peak
Perfect.
bagging challenge to do
And that's
420 climbs in New York's Catskill Mountains.
yikes. And you say that's pegged for the fall for around September?
September 23rd.
Cool. Come back and we'll talk about it. How does
I
that
will.
sound? All right. Thanks so much, Ken. Thank you for everybody listening, and we will catch you in the next one. Peace and love, guys.